Good evening, and I want to take this time to introduce myself. My name is Cedar Owens, and I want to welcome you to the Wicked Orchard Presents Reality and Fiction. This is my inaugural episode, the maiden voyage of my podcast, and I am so happy that you all have taken the time, your precious time, to join me today. Since it's the first episode, I am going to take a little bit of time to explain exactly what this is about. And it's kind of complicated, but just hang in there. So, The Wicked Orchard is the label that I created for the fiction that I write. It's a combination of things that are sinful or forbidden and information that you need to know. My fiction is very realistic, so realism and sinful comes together, and that's just what the Wicked Orchard is. The Wicked Orchard presents reality and fiction is exactly what it says. I'm going to talk about reality and I'm going to talk about fiction. The fiction part is easy to explain. I will be reading excerpts of the things that I have written, whether it be novels, published or unpublished, or whether it be short stories. Or just talking about my point of view on reading, writing, fiction, and the little bit I know about publishing and my experience with it. The reality part is a little bit multi-layered. So I don't want this to be clickbaity. I don't want it to be just low-hanging fruit, what celebrity did this and that. I don't care what the celebrities do. They can, go jump off something really far. I care because they're not servicing humanity, really. But things that impact society, that impact people on a day-to-day basis without them really knowing it. And lots of those things are rooted in history. So some of the things that I'm going to discuss will give you a brief history lesson before I talk about how it's impacting us on a daily basis. That's where the reality part comes in. As I get into this episode and into forthcoming episodes as the weeks and months go by, that'll become more apparent. The first thing that I'm going to discuss in this inaugural episode of Reality and Fiction is critical race theory. That was big in the news several months ago. People were in an uproar about critical race theory, and so I had to go and do some research because I honestly had not heard of critical race theory before. And people were so upset about it, they didn't want to talk to their kids at schools, and I'm like, so this seems to be a thing. And usually when beings are upset about something and don't want to talk in the schools to their precious children, they usually have the wrong idea about it. So I decided to do some research. And critical race theory was a theory that was developed back in the 1970s. It was developed in response to the fact that a lot of the strides made during the civil rights movement were being slowly undone. And so there were several legal scholars that wanted to find a way to prevent that from happening. I'm going to even go so far as to give you a general definition. CRT, critical race theory, was born out of the realization that legal scholars, lawyers, and activists and the advances they had made in the civil rights era had stopped and in some circumstances been reversed as, we moved out of the 60s and out of the 70s. And it goes on to say, it's got several tenets, but it goes on to say that racism is a fundamental part of American society, not simply an aberration that can be easily corrected by law. It's fundamental. It's the building block of the U.S. society. And when I watched different videos several months ago, the idea that racism is the basic foundation of the United States, of the American society, people were very unhappy with that. And most likely they were unhappy because it's true. The first to understand how a regime of white supremacy and the subordination of people of color have been created and maintained in America, and in particular to examine the relationship between the social structure and professed ideals such as the rule of law and equal protection. That is a quote, and I'm going to put links down to everything that I'm referencing, but If you stop and think about it. Critical race theory. It's the fundamental idea that the systems that govern the U.S. society are rooted in racism. If you're real with yourself, you can't deny that it's true. So let's just go back. Let's go back and we talk about it. So, okay, we all know uh, the United States was built on slavery. We don't have to go through the transatlantic slave trade. We know how they got the Africans over here and enslaved them for hundreds of years. Um, it wasn't abolished slavery until 1865, the 13th Amendment. That's what abolished slavery. And it says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So it's some tricky wording in there and gives them a lot to play with, that has become apparent in our modern society, with the for-profit prison system. That's probably reserved for a different podcast. Um, so let's see. Slavery is abolished. Eventually, everyone figures that out, and blacks who have been enslaved all their lives are trying to figure out how to move forward, and whites who are no longer having slaves are not happy about it. So there's a period after slavery called Reconstruction, and it was during Reconstruction where the Civil War actually ended. And during Reconstruction, there were a lot of progressive movements for minorities. Excuse me, not minorities at the time, blacks. They were, trying to vote. Some were beginning to hold office. Um, Things were improving. And I remember being a kid in school and learning about Reconstruction. And then it's almost like there's a big gap, and then it moves to Jim Crow. And then I always ask the question, what happened? If Reconstruction was actually a reconstruction, a rebuilding, a time where blacks were, shrugging off the shackles of slavery and becoming more, then what happened for Jim Crow to pull all of that away essentially? The Compromise of 1877. So I'm going to get into this very briefly so you can understand. The Compromise of 1877 was a backroom deal that took place between the Republicans and the Democrats at the time. The Democrats at the time were pro-slavery, did not like the state of things whatsoever. But the Republicans won the election of 1876. And the Democrats were going to not recognize the president, and I'm sorry I don't have the president who won at the time, but they weren't going to recognize the president. So to prevent things from becoming ugly, the Republicans made a deal with the Democrats. They were like, the Democrats said, we will recognize the president, the Republican president that was just elected, if you pull your troops out of the South. So that's what happened. All the troops that had been occupying the South to make sure that there was an equal footing for these former slaves to be able to do well and not fall back under the thumb of former Southern plantation owners, they were gone. So almost immediately after this compromise came to be is when Jim Crow laws started happening. So that's back in 1877, but it was already slowly in effect before that. But Jim Crow laws were implemented and basically required the separation of white and black people on all forms of transportation and schools, expanding out into every facet of social life. Everything became separate. Most people are familiar with Jim Crow laws because they existed well into the 20th century. I hope you can see the framework that is existing here in the U.S. That kept going for years. Black people were living under a system of racism. They couldn't vote. They didn't have, it was separate but equal. They didn't have the same things that white people had. Separate bathrooms, separate water fountains, separate schools. But it was never equal. It was always separate and it was always lesser. And that is the way the majority wanted it. That is what they were happy with. So I'm going to pause because we know the history of African Americans in America, but also woven through this exact timeline are the Chinese. So let me find my notes. All right. Um, in 1863 to 1869, 15 to 20,000 Chinese immigrants came from China to build the Transcontinental Railroad. I believe there was a big famine in China, and a lot of people left China coming here trying to find a way to make money to be able to either bring their families here or to send money back to their families. And the Chinese got here. They were free, cheap labor. They were abused. And those were another set of backs that this country was built upon. This was happening at the exact same time that former slaves were going from Reconstruction to Jim Crow in the American South. Or in America, let's be real about it, in America. Thousands upon thousands of Chinese were killed in the building of the railroads. And even though they were here doing the work to expand the fortune of the majority, they were still discriminated against. They were still hated. Or whites, working class whites, hated the Chinese for taking their jobs, but the rich whites were employing the Chinese because they could pay them less. You know, they were being damaged by their own kind, and they blamed the other when it wasn't their fault, and they had no power anyway. In 1882, in response to the public anger about so many Chinese immigrants coming into the country, they employed the Chinese Exclusion Act. And let's see, the Chinese Exclusion Act was the first significant law restricting immigration into the United States. Many Americans on the West Coast attributed declining wages and economic ills to Chinese workers. As I just said, it wasn't their fault, but that's where they laid the blame. The Chinese Exclusion Act wasn't repealed until 1943. The importance of China as the U.S. government's chief ally in the Pacific War against Japan during World War II led Congress to repeal the Chinese exclusion laws, placing China under the same immigration restrictions as European countries. Something else that is a part of critical race theory is the fact that minorities are only tolerated when they can benefit the majority in this country, and the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act exemplifies that. They did it because China was important to the U.S. defeating Japan during World War II. Had it not been, they probably would have never looked at it. Who knows when it would have been repealed? Let's take another step forward in history. Since I mentioned 1943, 1941, there was an attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan, essentially pulling the U.S. into World War II. So in response to this, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. It was a policy of the U.S. government that people of Japanese descent, including U.S. citizens, would be incarcerated and isolated in camps, in internment camps, in response to the Pearl Harbor attacks. So Japanese and Japanese American who have been living and thriving in this country, the United States, prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, were now seen as public enemy number one, pulled from their lives and put into internment camps. I mean, it seems to be showing over and over again in U.S. history how they other the minorities. The majority gets scared. No reason to be afraid of those who are here. They didn't attack us. A whole different country attacked us, but they're going to blame the ones who've been living here side by side with them for years and treat them like prisoners. In 1964, well after World War II, Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. We're all familiar with the Civil Rights Movement and how important it is, not just for blacks, but for many minorities, because the right to vote was well established and enforceable. It's important. But if you look at things without getting too deep, when Martin Luther King died in 1968, it's almost like it opened the door for a lot of the strides made to be undone, leading us into 1970, where critical race theory became a thing, because people who were looking could see everything that was done, everything that was right, was being undone. It still happens. We're still seeing the ramifications of uh, the general hatred that stems all the way back to slavery. And I haven't even talked about Native Americans. I haven't even talked about what the whites did to the Native Americans. They came here, of course, and found people living here, thriving here, living off the land, hunting. They saw them as savages, especially in the South, and made strides to tell them, to implore to them, hey, in order to be more civilized, you need to own slaves. In order to be more civilized, you need to stop hunting and start engaging in our capitalist economic society. And they did. They lost their land. Essentially, some would say they might have lost their souls if they're going to start participating in slavery, especially the way the whites of the time, back in the 1800s, did it. They became more civilized, but it just allowed the U.S. government to take from them, take land that was theirs, was theirs through birthright. They were born here. This is their land. White people came here from other areas. It's about manipulating the minority to get what you want to build the majority. That's what critical race theory is. So fundamentally, the United States is built on not just racism, but elitism, excuse me, and those have not gone away. You can look around every day and see it. So, it's come to a point in schools in this country. Many of the schools want to teach the children the truth, because everything that I have just outlined, I did not learn in school. I learned after I was no longer a grammar school, middle school, or high school student. I learned it researching on my own, documentaries, conversations. So it is important that children actually know the history of this country, because it's not pretty. And as much as others want to whitewash it, the truth is the truth. But there are parents, white parents, who have a problem with their children learning the truth, because they don't want them to feel guilty. They shouldn't feel guilty. Everyone knows that these children didn't commit these atrocities. Everyone knows that their parents didn't commit these atrocities. But it's important to understand what came before, so that you can make decisions as you grow up into an adult. These children become adults and going to be the ones that take the reins of this world, so they can understand the damage done in the past and not to visit those same damages into the future. The structure of the population of this country is changing. The majorities and the minorities, they're shifting. And a lot of people are afraid because they don't want to lose their hold on this country. But the more that they try to prevent their children from learning about critical race theory, honestly, the more they're going to want to learn about it. It's just like if you demonize drinking and tell them that drinking is against God, country, and Jesus, and then they go to college at 18 and spend every day binge drinking. They have no control. It's so taboo, they lose their minds. The more you make it taboo, and the more that they fight against it, the more that these children are going to be curious. Well, what is critical race theory? What is it talking about? Why doesn't my parents want me to learn about the past? What is it that's so bad? There's a lot that's so bad, but the truth is empowering. The truth can make you a better person. It's just it's a profound amount of guilt, I think, because if these parents stop and think about it, they can see this country that we love so much, the old red, white, and blue, is fundamentally built on the backs of minorities. Fortunes have been raised from blood sown into the very soil we walk on, and it's a painful truth. And people feel guilty. They don't want to face it, or they don't want their bubble upset. That's a large thing too. They had this bubble that they're living in and working in the best country on the planet. The streets are paved with gold. Everybody wants to come here. There's nothing wrong with it, but there's a lot wrong with it. And many of the things that were problems in the past are still problems now. And the more that we open our eyes to it, the better things may actually become. That's the solution to this. Not keeping critical race theory out to schools, not sheltering these children, but telling them the truth. Let them learn so that they can make better decisions when it's their turn to make better decisions. They can be better than people were in the past. You can't shelter them. You have to let them out the bubble. You have to let them out the bubble. It's the only way they can grow into functioning people who are going to run this country and this society and hopefully not run it into the ground. That's critical race theory. It's the fundamental idea that racism is the foundation of this country. Almost every system and institution in this country. And it says a theory, but if you go back and look through history, I would say it's a fact. This country is fundamentally based on racism. These systems that were developed hundreds of years ago are essentially still in place. The justice system, it sends a disproportionate amount of African Americans and Latino Americans to jail for small offenses, stop and frisk. The shootings, let's not even get into the shootings, the killings of unarmed black people and brown people or disabled people. It's just fundamentally bad. And the only way to solve this problem is to start in the schools. The children have to understand what's wrong and where it's come from. And that way, maybe we can fix it. I mean, it can be fixed fast if everybody just be better. It's easy to be better. If you see it's wrong, don't do it. But some people fight against that because being better, it disrupts their bottom line. And we always have to look out for the bottom line because it goes treading across our faces on a daily basis. I hope that this short trip through history has allowed you to be able to see some of what I've been getting at as far as the framework of critical race theory and how it relates to our history and our present. And maybe I'll incite you to take a look, research about it yourself, and have a better understanding. Maybe something you're going to want to explain to your children so that they can be better as they become older. This is the part where we're going to switch over to the fiction. Most of you don't know I am a published author. I have written and published 2 novels, the first of which is entitled A Haven Amidst Perdition, and the second is entitled Wildflowers, and I also have a short story called Quitting Time. All of those are available on Amazon, and I'll put links up so you can access those. I have been writing for a long time. I've always been one who was drawn towards fiction. I'm a reader. I love to read. I read far less now that I write, but I do love to read. I wrote stories when I was younger. As a matter of fact, when I was a senior in high school, one of my peers told me that I should go to school to be a writer, major in English instead. And she was probably right, but I didn't take that route. Nonetheless, I am going to use this platform to share some of my fiction with you. I am going to read a little bit from A Haven Amidst Perdition. My first published work. It was published back in 2017. I'm very proud of it. And I hope that you enjoy a little bit of this excerpt. I'll probably read a portion of the chapter for this podcast, and then we'll see how it goes with successive podcasts. But just want to introduce you to my first work, and I do hope that you enjoy it. Chapter 1. Same shit, different day. It's 4 a.m. and the rooster's crowing. I got to get up when he does or I'll be late getting breakfast started. Mama likes her food to be on the table when she gets home from work. She works at night cleaning all the rooms at the courthouse, and she always home by 6 o'clock every morning. You can set a rooster by it. Throwing the covers back, Eve shivers as the cold outside of the bed chases away the warmth of sleep. After a brief stretch and a yawn, she swings her feet to the cold wooden floor, where she quickly searches for her boots with her toes. Unable to find them, she reaches to her far right with her eyes closed and snags them, smiling when she feels her wool socks stuffed inside. Once her feet are snug inside her boots, she throws on her housecoat and walks to the bathroom in the dark. People think we're living high on the hog because we got a bathroom indoors. Mama been working at the courthouse so long, she make a good wage, so we got indoor plumbing and a looking glass. I can't go to school no more. Mama said I'm 14 and I need to learn how to pull my weight, so I got to do the cooking and cleaning until I turn 16, and then she said she can get me a job working with her. That'd be good. Maybe then I can live in town on my own and make some friends. Ain't no friends out here in the country, just chickens and the stray dogs that like hanging around Bertha. She our cow. While staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, there's a sudden hard thud on the bathroom door before it flies open. Quickly turning around, Eve can see Bear standing at the door in the dim lantern light. His eyes are half closed with sleep, but you can see the reddened rim of his lids and smell the moonshine on him. As she backs far into the corner, he briefly cuts his eyes at Eve before standing at the toilet, exposing himself and beginning to urinate in front of her. Unconsciously rubbing the scabbed over cut in her hairline, she remains quiet as the grave, staring up at the back of his head until he finishes. Pulling the chain to flush, he cuts his eyes at her and heads out the bathroom door. You make too much goddamn noise. Don't wake me up again, Bear says in a drink-laden, gravelly voice. Holding her breath, Eve remains motionless until she can hear the bedroom door close. Then she allows herself to breathe again. That's Bear. He Mama's husband. They ain't married official. They ain't been to see the preacher or nothing like that, but they live like husband and wife. Folks ain't too picky about that stuff in the country. No, he ain't my daddy. He and Mama had a baby boy a long time ago, but he died. Now he drink most of the time. He worked second shift at the mill and brew moonshine to sell, but he drink more of it than he sell. Lucky for us, Mama's job is so good. He don't like me none, 'cause I ain't his. Taking the lantern in her hand, Eve makes the short trip from the bathroom to the kitchen. The room is dark and still smells of last night's fried chicken. Pulling her house dress closer to her body, she exhales with a shiver, watching as the icy fog of her breath dissipates several inches in front of her. Turning to the right, she goes to the back door, which has a heavy wooden beam barricading it. Setting the lantern down, she uses both hands to lift it off and set it on the floor, before taking the lantern back up and going out into the cold morning. Crossing the backyard, Eve looks around for Bertha in the small, fenced-in pasture as she approaches the chicken coop. Once inside, she retrieves 7 eggs and places them in a basket that hangs on a nail just outside the door. Carrying the lantern and the basket, she steps back into the yard, but Bertha is nowhere to be found. Going to the small barn where she sleeps, she sets down the basket and pushes the door open. Lifting the lantern, she can see Bertha lying on her side, very still. Oh, no, 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 Bertha, you can't be sick, heifer, not today, not any day, Eve calls out, bewildered. She places a hand on the cow's snout and feels the elevated temperature. Looking Bertha over, Eve raises the lantern and looks down at her udders that are a bright red. Gently, she places a hand against it, and it is hard to the touch, causing the cow to cry out in obvious pain. Pulling her hand away and gently rubbing her snout once again, Eve lowers her head and sits quietly for a mere moment before rising and grabbing a large piece of burlap hanging from a nail on the wall. She drapes the piece of cloth over the young cow, covering as much of her as she can, before turning and leaving her alone in the cold darkness. When the sun begins its daily trek across the sky, Eve sets a bowl of oatmeal on the table with a bowl of sugar, brown sugar, and cinnamon around it. She places a mason jar of water next to it. Almost immediately, Bear steps into the kitchen and stands for just a moment, surveying the room and leering at her. He is shirtless this morning, wearing only a pair of boxer shorts and scratching his abdomen in that absent-minded way that men do immediately after waking. He stands at nearly 6 feet 6 inches tall, and he is a darker skinned brown man. Unlike most other country men who are strong but fat with a big gut, he is thickly muscled, resulting from years of working in the sawmill. After a long yawn and stretch, he strolls over to the table, slightly dragging his feet. Once there, he pulls out his chair and sits down and begins spooning the spices into his oatmeal. Slowly, he begins to mix the contents of his bowl while looking around the table. Next, his eyes fall on this mason jar of water, and his lip begins to curl as he stares at Eve. "Where's the milk?" Bear asks. "Ain't none," Eve answers. "What you mean, ain't none? You know I put milk in my oatmeal and drink a glass with every meal. Where is it?" "Bertha's sick. Ain't no milk. She got the fever," Eve explains. "Bertha? Mean that heifer out there? You ain't got but one job. Keep the house and mind them animals, and you can't do that?" Bear asks with increasing venom. Facing him, Eve says, "I bathe her udders every day, but you won't let me use no vinegar to disinfect them. Them dogs always suckling from her, and they ain't clean." Standing up, he says, "So is it my fault? Is that what you say?" Backing up, she says, "If you could fix the fence so they can't get to her, you have milk every morning, Bear." Grabbing his drinking jar, he hurls it at Eve's face, who is just able to get her arm up to absorb the impact, causing it to ricochet upward, skid across the kitchen cabinets, and then shatter on the floor. When she lowers her arms, Bear is standing nose to nose with her, leering down at her and breathing his foul morning breath into her face. "I'm gonna have milk today. Take your bastard ass down the road and get some from somebody," he demands of her. Trembling, she softly asks, "But what about Mama's breakfast? You know she want her eggs and ham." "You better go fast then," he says while backing up to the table. "Disinfect. Like you know something. I tell you what I know, we bet not have this talk tomorrow." Pushing the chair back with his foot, he plops down as Eve scampers across the kitchen and out the back door. Once outside, she does not stop her forward momentum, even with the fear coursing through her, making her shudder from head to toe. Looking up at the quickly brightening sky, she breaks into a run, knowing that she is running out of time. After about 10 minutes, she arrives at the nearest home, which belongs to the local preacher. Heavily out of breath, she leans over, resting with her hands on her knees, looking at the small white house with foreboding, before slowly approaching the door. "I don't have no more options. He the nearest and I gotta get back home. He the local preacher, but he ain't like preachers in town. He ain't got no education, or even a church. But since he claim to know the Bible and can shout good, folks gather on Sunday looking for salvation. I ain't looking for it. I'm looking for a real way out of here. I don't even know his name. He just preacher." Still breathing rapidly, Eve knocks hard and fast on the screen door and waits impatiently for 10 seconds. She is about to knock again when the front door steadily opens. The smell of cigarettes floods out of the home, forcing Eve to cough despite her overworked lungs. As the screen door opens, she backs up, and a short, fat man steps out onto the porch, pulling his suspenders up over his shoulders. His thinning hair is greasy and slicked back on his head. His yellow eyes narrow on her slightly, before a not-so-righteous smile touches his lips. "Eve, it sure is early, honey. What you doing here, girl?" Preacher asks her. "I'm right sorry to disturb you, sir, but our cow is sick and ain't gave no milk this morning. I need some awful bad. Could you please give us a bottle?" Eve asks. "Well, that sounds like a problem. I'll charge you 30 cents, Eve." Swallowing hard, she says, "I ain't got 30 cents, sir." Sounds like a bigger problem. That cow of yours gets sick often. I got 5 cows, and they all healthy as a horse. You hear that, girl? That's funny, girl," he bellows while slapping his knee with laughter. Calming, he says, "You hold on a minute, girl." Taking a deep breath, Eve glances up at the brighter sky as he goes back inside. He comes back within a minute, and he is carrying 2 bottles of fresh cold milk. "This what you need, girl?" he asks with a smirk. "Yes, sir." Nodding, he sets both bottles on the porch and then stands up straight, looking at her with his head tilted slightly back while nearing her. "How old are you, Eve?" "I'm 14, sir," she answers. "You need to start thinking about your future. You marrying age, and you need a man to take care of you, Preacher tells her. Mama say another year I'm gonna work with her. She says I ain't old enough for no marriage. I'm gonna talk to your mama, see if I can convince her that I's good for you. Maybe I can convince you too, he says while circling around behind her. Closing her eyes, she bites her bottom lip when she feels his hands lightly touch her shoulders and slowly slide down her chest and over her breasts. Your mama raised a good girl. Nobody can really see what good titties you got underneath those big clothes, but a man with experience like myself can tell, Preacher says. Slowly, he begins to rub her breasts in circles, strongly squeezing them on and off. Preacher, I got to get home before Mama does, lest she gonna tan my hide, she pleads. Don't rush me now. Pulling up the front of her oversized house dress, he slides his hands up her abdomen and settles back on her breast, using his dry fingertips to stimulate her nipples in slow circles. This continues for several minutes before gripping both breasts one final time and releasing her. Then he walks back in front of her, picks up the 2 bottles of milk, and hands them to her. You think about that now, and enjoy your milk, Eve. Thank you, sir, she says while taking the bottles and running as fast as she can out of his yard. The run back home takes longer since she is carrying the bottles and still reeling from the visit at the preacher's home. When she gets to her front door, she can see the light on in the kitchen, and she can hear her mother and Bear arguing inside the house. With a deep breath, she runs up the back steps and slides to a halt only a few feet from her mother. Where the hell you been? I've been working all night and got no breakfast when I get in. I'm about to get the switch and whoop up on you, girl, her mother yells at her. I'm sorry, Mama. Bear told me to go find some milk for his oatmeal, and he didn't care how, she answers while putting the milk on the table. Why we need milk? We got that expensive cow, so we don't have to buy no milk. Bertha's sick, Mama. Thinks she got infection in her teats again, Eve tells her. I told you to take care of the damn cow. I do, Mama, but Bear says I can't waste no vinegar on her, and them mangy dogs keep suckling off her. Shut the hell up talking about me, and give me some fresh damn oatmeal, he yells at her. As Eve tries to slip past her mother to the stove, she stops her and tilts Eve's head towards her. How you get that cut in your scalp? I was bringing Bear a jar of shine last night, and I tripped on his boot in the middle of the floor, and I dropped it, and it broke. So he hit me and made me clean it up, she confesses, slightly withering under Bear's venomous leer. Quickly, Eve's mother turns on Bear, nearly screaming, How the hell you gonna yell at me about her not making breakfast when you stated beating on her? Stop hitting on this child like that. You ain't got the sense that God gave nobody. May Evelyn, you need to shut the hell up, too, or you'll get the same. Now make the damn oatmeal, Eve. Seeing her mother wither as well, Eve slides past her and starts remaking his oatmeal and frying eggs and ham. Agonizing minutes pass until she sets the bowl of oatmeal in front of Bear and a plate of eggs and ham in front of her mother. When they begin to eat in silence, she grabs the second bottle of milk and places it in the icebox. Who gave you that milk, Eve? May Evelyn asks her. Preacher did, ma'am. Oh, Preacher did. You know he's a good man. He thinks a lot of you. He tells me so, she says with beaming pride. Yes, ma'am. When the kitchen falls silent again, Eve waits a few moments before walking behind her mother into the bathroom, where she closes the door behind her. For several minutes she stands in the dark, taking deep breaths, trying to regain the calm that had been missing since she found Bertha before dawn. Once the sound of her heart seems steady, she turns on the light and looks at herself in the looking glass. Tilting her chin up, she examines her high cheekbones as the overhead light causes her hazel eyes to sparkle. She rubs the light, almost yellowish-brown skin over her cheeks and down her neck before pushing her straggly, curly light brown hair behind her ears. Mama say that I ain't never gonna have to worry about pressing and straightening my hair. It's already as good as white folks since my daddy white. Never seen him and she don't talk about him, but that's how come I look so different than her. She's short and brown with a big round butt and small titties and thick nappy hair. She's pretty, but a different pretty than me. I'm taller with long legs and the same big round butt, but my titties is fuller and rounder and prettier and just plain bigger. That's why she get my clothes so big so nobody can really see. I hate that fucking preacher. He ain't no godly man, and Anytime I got to beg for something, he got to feel on me, and I seen him do it to other girls too when he think ain't nobody looking. There be rumors that some of the young girls be having babies and that they his, but they don't tell, and he don't neither. I hate him so much, but when he touch me, I like it when he touch me. The way it feel in my titties and low down between my legs. Mama calls it my treasure. I'm 14 and almost 15 and already started bleeding. Mama say that now I can have babies, so I bet not let nobody near my treasure. But when preacher touch me, that's what I feel like I need. Something near my treasure. I touch it myself a lot when I'm alone. Ain't it nice? But feel like I'm missing something special. I mean, I know what grown people do. I seen it when Barry and Mama do it. I scared of him, but when he be on top of her, I be wishing it me. Sometimes I hate myself for feeling that way. Sometimes I don't. Standing in the bathroom with her house dress pulled up, Eve quietly pleasures herself, bringing herself nearer and nearer to much needed satisfaction when there's a sudden thud on the door. Come on out of there, Eve. I got to bathe and go to bed. And you got to make Bear's lunch and dinner before he go to the mill. You know how he is now. Come on out of there, her mama demands. Looking in the mirror, Eve sighs heavily before lowering her dress, washing her hands, and returning to the kitchen. And that is the conclusion of Chapter 1, Same Shit, Different Day, from A Haven Amidst Perdition. I hope all of you listening have enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed this entire Maiden Voyage inaugural podcast. I'm a little nervous, so it's not as clear and as crisp as it could be, but I assure you I will improve as time goes on. I want to thank you so much for sharing your precious time with me and taking the time to listen. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you come back next time to listen again. This is Cedra Owens, and this is The Wicked Orchard Presents Reality and Fiction. You all take it easy.